Have you ever wondered who's supposed to pay all the closing costs when you buy or sell a piece of land? Like, what are the norms, or who should you safely assume is going to pay for which costs when a deal is closed? When you buy or sell a property, it's not just about the purchase price. There are a lot of other little odds and ends that need to be paid for in order to get a deal closed and get the title from the seller's name to the buyer's. I'm talking about things like paying for the title company to do their work in closing the deal. Who's going to pay for the title insurance? Who's going to pay for any current or back due taxes owed on the property? And who's going to pay for those pesky little fees like recording fees and transfer taxes, and maybe even paying for a mobile notary if you need one? Now, don't get me wrong, usually these costs are not crazy high, but still, someone's got to pay for them. And whether you're buying or selling a property, you need to work with the other party to decide which of you is going to pay for what. So who usually foots the bill for all this stuff? Well, it's going to vary depending on which specific costs we're talking about, which person you are in the deal, and also what the norms are in the market or the area where your property is located. But ultimately, it all boils down to what is written in the purchase agreement between the buyer and seller, because either party can pay for any of these things. It just depends on how it's written there. The purchase agreement, or the PA, is kind of like a little set of instructions that the title company is going to use when they put together the closing statement, or the HUD, which is basically like a big detailed receipt that shows all the different closing costs in the deal and which party is paying for which costs. So let's start by establishing what are these costs and who normally pays for which ones. And then we'll talk about how you can set it up, because you don't have to follow the norms in the area where you're working. It's just a matter of what you end up writing in that purchase agreement that both parties agree to. So let's start with title insurance. When you're closing with a title company, title insurance is almost certainly going to be part of the package. This is the assumption that they make. So who's going to pay for this title insurance policy? Well, it's actually important to note that there are two different types of title insurance policies. There's the owner's title insurance policy, which is meant to protect the buyer for any past title defects, and typically this is paid for by the seller. And this can actually differ in some states, but most commonly I've seen that the seller pays for this in the closing statement. So the reason the seller pays for the owner's title insurance policy is because they're basically saying that up until this point of time when I'm selling this property to you, it has no prior title defects, and here's an insurance policy to give you some insurance for that. Now, if the buyer is getting a loan to buy that property, then there's also going to be something called the lender's title insurance policy. This is usually for a lower amount, just the amount of that loan, and this kind of title insurance policy doesn't do anything for the owner. The entire purpose of this policy is just to protect the lender if they need this kind of protection. And typically, the buyer is the one who pays for this policy because it's their loan, not the seller's. Now, I know what you're thinking. 2 title insurance policies for one property? Seriously? Is this some kind of money grab or something? Well, maybe, but hey, I'm not here to say whether it's fair or not. I'm just telling you who typically pays for which one. Now, moving on, we've got the closing fee paid to the title company or the attorney who's closing the deal for you. Who usually pays for this? Well, this fee is oftentimes split equally between the buyer and seller, but it can differ. It just kind of depends on what you negotiate. In some cases, the buyer might pay for this entire fee if it's a buyer's market and if they're buying that property at a huge discount. Or it could also go the other way where the seller pays for it if they choose to do that. Again, it just comes down to what is written in the purchase agreement. But one thing is for sure, if you're using a title company or closing attorney, someone's going to have to pay for it. Now, what about property taxes? So even if the property tax bill is paid up to the most recent property tax bill that was owed, the norm is for the title company or the closing agent to prorate the property taxes. So they kind of estimate what they think the next property tax bill is going to be, and then they chop it up into 365 increments based on, how much it is per day. And then they draw a line on the calendar and say, okay, seller, every day leading up to this point, you're going to pay for. And then, okay, buyer, every day from this point on, you're going to pay. And they split it up that way. That's what proration is, when they prorate taxes. Now, next up, we have transfer taxes. So I don't even know if transfer taxes are technically a thing in every single state, but in a lot of the states that I've worked in, they are a thing. They charge you tax just because of the fact that the property title is being transferred. And these are often paid for by the seller, but in some areas the buyer might be on the hook for part of this cost as well. It kind of just depends on how you negotiate it. If you're not really sure what the norms are in your area, just give a call to a local title company and ask them, what's the norm in this area? Who typically pays for the transfer taxes? And that'll kind of give you a baseline for what normal is. And you can kind of use that to sweeten your deal for yourself or for the other party, depending on what's most helpful to you. And also, we have the recording fees. So this is another little fee you have to pay to the county recorder for the arduous task of taking a piece of paper and running it through their scanner to record it in the public records. It's almost enough to break a sweat, and not surprisingly, the county doesn't do their work for free either. But luckily, it's usually not terribly expensive, and these costs are usually paid for by the buyer, because again, the title is going in the buyer's name. And if you happen to have a mobile notary required in this process to get the deal closed, they'll usually add the cost of that mobile notary to the title company's closing fee. So again, it'll kind of be paid for as part of that. So now that we've covered what is normal, how do we handle this when we're buying properties at a huge discount? Because after all, buying properties at a huge discount is not normal. So should these norms still apply? If you're writing up the purchase agreement yourself, how should you write this up? Well, for me, when I'm buying a property at a huge discount, my goal is to make it as easy as possible for that seller to say yes. After all, they're already taking a huge haircut on the property by selling it at such a discounted price, and we both know that. So the last thing I want to do is continue to nickel and dime them to death. Since I'm already getting some huge value in free real estate equity when I buy this property, I am more than happy to cover all of these closing costs, including any back due taxes that might be owed on the property. The only stipulation is the total amount of money that I'm putting into buying this property, whatever that number comes out to, it still needs to leave plenty of room for me to make a profit in that deal. For example, if the property taxes are just some ridiculous sky-high amount that exceeds the value of the property itself, then no, I'm not going to do that deal. If there's not enough room for me to make a very clear profit, then that's a deal killer, and I'm going to walk away from that. But as long as all those closing costs can fit in with the purchase price without eating up my entire profit margin, I'm happy to pay them. And this makes it much easier for that seller to say yes, because the check that they get after closing is going to be for the exact same amount that was shown on the purchase agreement without any hidden costs in there. Now, when I'm selling a property, it's usually selling for a price that's much closer to its actual market value, or at least a lot more than what I paid for the thing. And in those cases, I'll be closing with the title company and I'll just default to whatever the norms are in that area, which I just explained a few minutes ago. And in the rare case where I am a motivated seller trying to unload a property that I've been holding on to for way too long and I just want to get out of this deal as soon as possible, in those cases, I'll definitely try to get that buyer to pay for some, if not all, of these closing costs. And a lot of times, the people that are buying this property for me are other real estate investors, so they totally get it, and it's not asking much for them to pay for these costs, especially since they're getting it at a discount in the first place. But ultimately, it's just a game of negotiation. And if for some reason, me as the seller paying for the closing costs, if that's what moves the needle and gets the property to sell, then I'll do that too. It just depends on the deal and how I can preferably not lose any money on the deal. So there you have it. Closing costs can seem like a pretty small part of the deal, but sometimes they can make a big difference in your bottom line depending on what those closing costs are, whether you're buying or selling. It obviously helps to know what the norms are in your area, but again, this is all a game of negotiation. There's no hard and fast rules about who has to pay for what. It's just a matter of what helps get the deal done and how can you make the most money in that process. By understanding who typically pays for what and how you can leverage these costs in your deals, you'll be in a much stronger position to close more deals, make things easier for the other party, and ultimately, improve your profit margins. If you're in the land business, don't be afraid to think outside the box when it comes to these closing costs. Sometimes covering them can be a great bargaining chip that helps you close the deal faster, especially when you're getting the property at a great price. Just be sure it all fits within your profit margins, and you'll be good to go. If you want more insights on how the closing process works when you're buying or selling land, be sure to check out this video and I'll walk you through each step of the process. And if you found this helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tips on land investing, and I'll talk to you in the next video.